The presentation today is from the Workplace Gender Authority, or Gender Equality Agency, and the title is Where We Are and What We Need to Do. So Heidi, thank you very much.
We're very pleased to be here today to talk about this issue as to how to secure the future for older Australian women and the role that the agency can play in at least addressing some of the challenges. So today I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about the state of play of gender equality in Australian workplaces. I'll talk a little bit about the agency's role in addressing some of these challenges. And then I'll talk about some practical measures that organisations can take to address some of these challenges. So I'm taking a slightly different tact than some of the speakers this morning by really focusing on workplaces and what the business community can do. So if we just ask ourselves the question as to what is gender equality, and if you just take a moment to reflect on your own personal view as to what gender equality is and perhaps some personal experiences that you may have had in the workplace or in other aspects of your life, it does mean different things to different people, and the more we converse with people and really understand their own experiences, the more we understand the disparity in how people think about this issue. But from the agency's perspective, we really see workplace gender equality as when women and men have equal representation, are equally valued and equally rewarded in the workplace. And the question is, are we there yet? Where are we when it comes to workplace gender equality? So I've got a few statistics on screen. So if you think about this, Australia is ranked #1 when it comes to educational attainment for women in the world. But this isn't translating into workforce participation for women. You can see that we're ranked 52nd in the world when it comes to workforce participation. It's interesting, in Australia we actually have higher rates of education for women than men, but that's not translating into their participation, unfortunately. We also have a lot of issues around workforce composition and composition at the leadership levels. Still a gender pay gap, and a couple of speakers are going to touch on that today. And then, of course, issues around sex-based harassment and discrimination, which I'm sure Alison will probably touch on as well. Now, if we go into a bit more detail on leadership composition, it's something that I'm quite interested in, and we look at some of the stats, you can see here on screen how composition changes as we move up the organisational hierarchy. So at the entry level, graduate entry level, we are seeing around 50-50, 40-60. As we move up to manager levels, we're seeing that change to around the 35% for women, 60% for men. And then as we move up to the senior leadership levels and to CEOs, we're really starting to see that disparity occur. If we look at some of the recent figures from the Census on Women in Leadership, we see that less than 10% of Australian ASX companies have less than 10% on the Australian ASX are executives. Less than 10% of executives on the Australian ASX. Sorry, let me just get that stat right. So this is really woeful. We're really not seeing women moving up into those leadership levels. We can see that just a little over 60% of ASX 200 companies have no female executives. So over half of our leadership teams, of our leading companies, have no women on their executive teams. And what we can also see is in this group of companies, the ASX 200, that only 6% of line manager roles are held by women. So this is something I'm particularly passionate about, because we tend to think of women in leadership as this bucket, that it's just about getting women up the chain. But what happens is we're often seeing, and it's wonderful that we see women as the head of HR or the head of public affairs, but we're not seeing women as the head of an operational role or a division. And what this means is that they're not in the pipeline to CEO, which also means those additional big salaries. You see organisations that just say, not an issue, so they're in the avoidance. They say they're either not aware of the issues, or they're not interested, or they totally don't believe that there's an issue. We then see a lot of organisations in the compliance phase. So they're really thinking, okay, there's fair work, there's various discrimination pieces of legislation, and there's the Workplace Gender Equality Act. So they really see this as a legal issue that they have to do something about, but the bare minimum. We then see organisations take a programmatic approach. So they might have some kind of training on financial literacy for women, or they might have paid parental leave scheme, but it's very much misaligned to their business strategy. And so you see ad hoc issues or ad hoc programs within a company. Now that's admirable, but it often has a detrimental effect because people get gender fatigue in the business and they say, well, we're investing in all of these gender initiatives, but nothing's really happening. So what we'd like to see at the agency is companies moving more into the strategic, into 3, 4 and 5, which is looking at their business strategy and then really making an assessment as to how a more gender diverse and inclusive workforce will support their overall business objectives. And then obviously integrating that into the business strategies and systems and processes, and then ultimately into the cultural systems within the organisation. Now this is under development, this concept at the moment, and many of you who are working, hopefully you'll see the relevance of this, and also the ability for a company to be able to position itself in one of these 6 phases, and then make an assessment as to where they want to go. Now I won't go into this too much, but what we are also developing is a gender equality scorecard. So identifying what are the 10 key performance areas for a business to improve its gender equality performance, and then the strategies that sit under each one of these. So I won't go into too much detail on that. The one point here that is really important and related to today's conversation is around pay equity. I really see that as one of the most important issues for companies to address in terms of the longer term economic security for women, because we do want to make sure that women in the workforce are paid equally for equal work, because of the compound effects, because of fairness, but also the compound effects for their economic security during retirement. So I'm going to wrap my presentation up there and just give you some key takeaways, which is we are making progress, but there's still a lot more work to be done. The agency has a really important role in terms of collecting this data through this year's reporting and then providing that data back to organisations to really understand where they are and where they want to go, and then how they're going to get there. So that's through our education program, the how are they going to actually drive change. It's critical that businesses see this as a strategic issue, and not only gender equality but diversity more broadly, by bringing different people to the organisation and really understanding how that will lead to superior business performance. And then absolutely making this link that gender equality is so important for us to achieve from a business perspective, from a national productivity perspective, but absolutely from an individual's perspective, and particularly for securing the future for Australian women in older age, because we want to make sure that throughout the course of their life they have the ability to be equally valued, equally represented and equally rewarded. So thank you so much, and I look forward to discussing these issues with you in much more detail.